How you doing? I'm Ken Bykoff, and welcome to O'Neill Speaks, the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. We've all seen the horrific footage. Black smoke billowing hundreds of feet in the air, a fire at a plastic recycling warehouse in Richmond, Indiana, completely out of control and raging while firemen are nearly powerless to stop it. Thousands being evacuated, fleeing to protect their family from the toxic fumes. Now, these sorts of disasters have become a theme in 2023. Behind the horrifying footage are real lives that are being impacted and environments are being forever changed. We're joined today by Assistant Professor Marta Venier, an environmental chemist who studies the fate, transport, and behavior of persistent organic pollutants, or POPs, in the indoor and outdoor environment, including both legacy and emerging pollutants. Her laboratory analyzes POPs and organic toxic chemicals in indoor and outdoor air, water, sediment, soil, biological samples, and consumer products. Professor Venier, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Well, how did you get interested in your area of research, which, pollutants and chemicals and things like that?
So I've been passionate about chemicals in the environment, especially chemicals that should not be necessarily in the environments, that come from the human activities. Everything we do, all the products that we use, generally release chemicals in the environment. And so I'm particularly interested in seeing which chemicals are out there and how they move through different environmental media from the air, the water, and the animals. In particular about the fire, a few colleagues had sent me the news information. And in fact, one of my students approached me after class saying, "Hey, Professor, I'm from Richmond, Indiana. Have you heard about the fire?" And so we chatted a little bit about it, and he asked me what I thought and what his family should do. And then that got me thinking. And so I became more interested in it.
So what do people not understand about the chemicals that are being released in this kind of fire?
So when this was a plastic recycling facility, and so there's all kinds of chemicals being released from there. So first of all, there's when you burn anything, even when you grill, you release polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And those, for sure, are going to be in the air in that locations. But then we have plastic involved, and there's a lot of components to plastic. So there's the plastic materials, the polymers that burn. And like we've seen in the Ohio train derailment, depending on what type of plastic was stored there, they can generate dioxin, which are one of the most toxic chemicals that can be found in the environment. But then there's other chemicals in plastic, flame retardants, PFAS, chemicals that are added to the plastic to have additional properties, either flame resistant or stain resistant or grease repellent. And so all of these chemicals, too, will burn in the fire. So I think it's going to be an interesting soup of chemicals out there.
There's obviously the short-term impact of this fire, people having to evacuate these materials all over the place. But what's the longer-term impact of these chemicals that are being released?
It's hard to say too much in details because I would need to know more specifically what are the chemicals that have been released. And we actually are collecting samples. On Friday, two members of my group drove up to Richmond, and they collected water samples, and they have left there some air samplers, which are really like salad bowls with foam disc that will collect the air. And we leave it out there for maybe a week. Hopefully nobody will take it down. We'll still find it after a week. And we'll analyze which chemicals are in there. But in terms of the more general terms of the long-term effects, I would be concerned about finding dioxin there because those are really toxic. And then these chemicals can get absorbed to the soil, the plants, and be uptaken in the food that people grow. It's a spring, so people have already started to plant. And so there can be long-term effects because these chemicals are extremely persistent.
What kind of effects can that have on a human body? How does it impact health?
So these chemicals have been, in general, we are talking about general broad terms, have been associated with cancer, increased obesity. PFAS in particular have been associated with decreased immune response. So there's a wealth of effects. But it's important to remember that the dose actually matters. We would need to see what are the levels of these chemicals in the air, in the water, and in the environment in general before we can actually talk about significant toxic effect. But for sure, there are short-term effects. I would advise people not to spend too much time outdoors, don't ventilate their homes, and possibly wear masks.
I know the EPA has told people you could come back, that they've lifted that evacuation order. In terms of things like these chemicals falling on schools, people are concerned about their children in that kind of situation. I mean, how should parents react to that kind of thing? And is that something that concerns you in terms of the children coming back to the area?
So it's a good question. I think that I've read in the news that the EPA has been cleaning, and they were starting with the schools, so kids could go back to school, which I think is very important. And I'm sure that if the EPA has recommended people to come back, they did it based on sound scientific information. I don't know exactly what they've measured, so I can't comment on that. I think that after the schools have been cleaned from dust and debris, they were cleaning the roofs to make sure that there were no plastic particles, any burnt parts there. It should be relatively safe, but I still think that maybe kids should not play outside for a little bit longer until there's more information.
These kind of fires that burn so out of control, and there was so much plastic in it, what could be done to avoid those kind of fires and these kind of disasters in the future?
Stop using plastic. That's easier said than done. The other day, maybe yesterday, I read of another train derailment in May. I have the feeling that these incidents happen more frequently than we actually hear about. And in particular, in this situation, I think the company was stocking a lot of plastic, not necessarily in a proper way. And in fact, it was hard for the fire department to reach the facility. But I think at the same time, this fire raises the question of what do we do with plastic? We tend to forget about plastics, but we are polluting the whole world. And we tend to forget that we don't recycle as much plastic as we think we recycle. And most of the plastic is shipped overseas to poorer countries where they don't have the facilities to treat and recycle properly this plastic. So it becomes, we're moving the environmental problem from one place to the other because we don't want to deal with it. But this puts it back on the top of our priorities, I hope.
I know you've done a ton of research and studies on PFAS, which I'll allow you to go ahead and pronounce what that is. But I know it's a stain-resistant chemical that goes on clothing and has been found in school uniforms. Some of the replacements for it have gone into food containers that supposedly don't break down. That it turns out it does. Those kind of elements, beyond just the plastic that when it's burning, if you could explain a little bit just kind of how the impact of the breakdown of those chemicals in some very common items could be impacting people.
Yeah, so PFAS is a really terrible acronym. We always joke that we should buy a vowel. It stands for pair and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So the nickname that may be more common is forever chemicals because these chemicals are very persistent. Once they're out in products and the environment, it's really hard to break them down. And they have also been associated with a wealth of negative health effects from cancer, decreased immune response, and so on. And everywhere we look, we end up finding some levels of PFAS. You mentioned school uniforms, where they're used to make the clothes stain resistant and stain repellent, which in principle seems a great property to have, but I'm not sure the cost of that explains the benefits. And recently we find them in fast food packaging material, those recyclable paper bowls. And even there, we are trading off recycling material with a material that contains high levels of PFAS. And what we have noticed, you mentioned degradation products and how they break down. Especially in the food packaging materials, we have seen evidence of use of polymeric PFAS. And those were considered safer because they're larger, they are less bioavailable, and so they should be stable. But our results showed that they're not as stable as we thought, and they can still break down and end up possibly in our food, making it another route of exposure. So PFAS are really now the hot topic of environmental exposures, I would say.
Do you think businesses take these kind of things seriously enough to where you have these chemicals that are used for their products, but they might be bad for the environment? They might have an impact on their consumers. Are they taking the effort to try to fix some of these problems seriously enough?
So there's a lot of movement nowadays about replacing these PFAS, let's say, for example. And a lot of manufacturers react and take action even before there's any regulations, because actually currently there's no regulation on PFAS. The EPA is starting to regulate drinking water, but that will start in 2025. There's some regulation about textile products and cosmetics, but again, that will start in 2025. But some big chain manufacturers have already committed to have PFAS-free products. So there is a lot of movement. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement and action. And I think that these changes should probably happen a little bit faster to be more impactful.
And these regulations make a difference, because I know you had a recent study where you found some of these forever chemicals fading away in the Great Lakes region, that once some regulations for some of these chemicals, it seems to be limiting the impact of it over time. So these regulations work.
They do. I see. You're talking about the pesticides.
Yes.
I was lost for a second. Yes, so regulation actually worked. For once in that study, we were able to report good news, which is something rare for us, to be honest. And in particular, we reported that some insecticides are actually declining with time, showing that regulations actually worked. But let's not forget that it took more than 30 years for this to work. So I think we need to act fast because these chemicals are used in such a high number of products that we all have them in our bodies. And so we need to have fast reaction to this so that we don't wait for another 40 years to report some good news.
The chemicals are effective at serving their purpose, whether it's stain resistance or whatever it may be. But what is the best way to find a balance between being practical and being safe?
Cool. That's a good question. So my perspective is that we can't stop progress, and we all benefit from some of these products. We all like pans that we don't have to scratch for 20 minutes after we have fried our eggs. Just to have an example,
Right.
we want to have effective raincoats that protect us from the rain. At the same time, we all want safe products. So we don't want to get toxic chemicals out of the pans that we cook or the clothes that we wear. So how do we deal with that? I think we need to have safer chemicals. So there's got to be more research in producing chemicals that have less side effects and especially less health effects, so that we can be using these safely.
Well, Martha, your insight on pollutants is absolutely invaluable, and I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I certainly hope that you'll join us again to talk about maybe a little bit brighter subjects in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to having more good news.
That would be great. Well, that's all the time we have today on O'Neill Speaks. O'Neill Speaks is the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. All opinions and comments on O'Neill Speaks belong to the host and the guest of the O'Neill School and don't necessarily reflect those of the school itself. Music for O'Neill Speaks is by Manos Mars. Be sure to subscribe to O'Neill Speaks on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcatcher app so you don't miss an episode. We're out of time, but for now, and for the O'Neill School, I'm Ken Bykoff saying thanks for listening, everybody.